Hello, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond. My name is Taylor, and welcome to the first impressions video for Like a Dragon Ishin, or Ishin Like a Dragon. Now, when I read the title, like on the cover, it looks to me like Ishin Like a Dragon. However, when I googled this title, it does say Like a Dragon Ishin. Now, this is the latest international release, I want to stress that, international release, in the Yakuza or Like a Dragon franchise. Now, the reason I say that is this game originally released in February 22nd, 2014, exclusively in Japan. So that, to me, was a big reason why I felt the way I did about the game and what I'm going to talk about in this video. Now, for full disclosure, I did play this on Xbox Game Pass, so I did not pay for it directly. I paid for it indirectly through being subscribed to Game Pass. Again, think Game Pass is a great deal. Think most streaming services of that quality are a fantastic deal. This was a, quote, day one release, again, for the international stage. Evidently not a day one release for the original. So I did not pay for the game, and it's personally hard for me to recommend paying for the game, but that's just because this game felt old, and I now understand why. So, as you've seen in the footage, first of all, I'm bad at Yakuza games. I've never really delved into them from, like, a personal standpoint. I have watched a few bits of playthroughs. I know of the Yakuza series. I own a couple of them. And as far as I always understood it, it was, I knew they were re-releases of, or remakes, in some cases, of games originally exclusively released in Japan. So they would always feel a little older, but to me they always looked really cool, really interesting. I just never had the time or never wanted to dedicate the time to sinking into their hundreds of hours of, mini games and side quests and all this other stuff. And this was on Game Pass, and I figured, what the heck, I'll make a video on it, I'll give it a shot. And I was thoroughly confused. Now, the characters are not the same as they are in the traditional Yakuza series, because this is technically a spin-off series. Which is kind of funny because the characters still look the same. They're using the same character models that you would find in the mainline Yakuza series. Kazuya Kiryu, my boy Majima, the weirdest dude out there, and I love him to death because he's so dumb. And just other characters who I could not name because, again, I have a passing knowledge, if that, of the Yakuza franchise. But you do not play as those characters, only very similar character models of them. And you do not play in, the late 1900s Japan. You play in a much earlier time period of Japan. The samurai are beginning to die out due to the invasion of outside forces, but also the invention of technology. The handgun, the rifle, things that, quote, level the playing field. So this period was the late 1860s, which is kind of nearing the end of the Edo period, and there was a lot of changes historically, politically, and culturally in Japan at this time. Now you play as Sakamoto Ryoma, a disgraced former samurai who lost his father in a political plot, and there's just a whole bunch of stuff happened that I was really confused about, and I don't think or feel that playing the other Yakuza games would have prepared me for it. But basically, the game opens with this really long cutscene where you see a couple, again, characters that we know from the previous games. I don't know if it's characters in previous or subsequent games, just because I don't know the timeline. But anyway, they're characters we've seen before in some capacity, and then you go and you assassinate this one guy, and then suddenly you're on a boat to your hometown. And I could not for the life of me figure out if this was meant to be before or after the cutscene that we just watched. Basically, you go back to your hometown, you have no status, you have no class, you're a goshi. So like you're the lowest of the low in terms of the samurai class. You get in some trouble, your adoptive dad, who turns out to be a magistrate, bails you out and says, hey, I want you to help your brother in leading this political revolution because we are going to change this town or this prefecture of Japan. And then, oh, surprise, surprise, your dad gets assassinated and your brother gets heavily injured by some gold arm-guarded ninja guy. Suddenly cut to 1 year later, where you are pretending to be a drunken gambler as you search different dojos for the particular style that the assassin was using. Now, for context, your brother was heavily injured but not killed, and I personally have my suspicions, knowing just how dramatic, how crazy some Yakuza plots can get, that your brother is in some way connected to the assassin. He didn't die on purpose, and then he tried to sacrifice himself, or quote unquote, sacrifice himself, so that you could lead the political party, knowing that you wouldn't let that stand. So basically, you lock him up, say, hey, I'm innocent, will not return until I have found my father's killer, and then you jump in the river, and we're, again, cutting to 1 year later. You basically have all the information that I got, which is not a lot, was very confusing, was also steeped in all the culture and history of Japan at this time. Now, I used to be really big into anime, I used to be really big into the surface level of Japanese culture. It wasn't much. I was significantly more interested in Chinese history personally, so I studied up a lot on that. And the Tokugawa shogunate and like the other more quote famous periods of Japanese history did interest me from more than just an anime standpoint. But I will say I'm wholly unfamiliar with the late 1800s in Japan, so some of my interest was certainly lost at that point. Like, I didn't have the same kind of connection that I would have if I had studied this time period personally. And I love history, I'm a history graduate. I also love Asian history, I need to study more of it. But again, I did not have the same kind of connection to this time period or this cultural shift in the world as I might have otherwise. So that, I do believe, hampered my enjoyment, but also kind of confused me, because I know these games, like many other games, are quite known for, you know, bringing in historical events or historical characters and inserting their own tales, their own fiction into it. But I didn't experience a lot of that, as I only played about an hour and a half, and there's so much of this is cutscenes. Now, I'm okay with it. I want to stress, I am okay with this, because I understand that it's an older game. Like, if it had come out a few months later, because this released on October 17th, 2023, and I recorded it the day after, it's currently October 18th, a few months rather, this game will be 10 years old, the original version. Now, as far as I understand it, this was not a remake, this was a remaster, and it looks good for the time, but I do also, and this is a weird thought, remember looking at the cutscene and thinking, those toes look weirdly blocky. Like, it reminded me of an early PS4 game, and I couldn't put my finger on why. And I looked up the release date, again realizing, hey, this is probably a re-release, only to discover that this is a game from almost 10 years ago. Now, you've seen the gameplay at this point, and I was very confused, because the last game that I had seen with the Like a Dragon subtitle or suffix from the Yakuza franchise or spin-off franchises was Yakuza Like a Dragon. Now, that was the first turn-based game in the Yakuza franchise and played very differently to this one, and that is what I had expected going into it. I did not look up promotional materials for the game, I did not look up gameplay of the game ahead of time, I jumped in blind, was expecting this like crazy turn-based thing set in, you know, the 1800s Japan, and what I got was a much more traditional Yakuza experience as far as I understand. Now, I suck at Yakuza combat, I have never tried it, I was really confused, and it genuinely took me like 5 minutes to figure out how to parry someone, because I kept trying to do it with like a weapon in my hands, thinking that I had to have a picked up weapon, only to then realize, no, I was just getting the timings wrong when I was using my bare hands to parry, and I was like, what is going on here? I genuinely thought I was going to spend my 2 hours trying to learn how to parry. So part of my confusion came from the naming scheme. The other part of my confusion came from, again, just being relatively inexperienced with the combat system. Now, I want to really stress why I thought this was akin to the recently being 2021, Yakuza Like a Dragon, because that game was released in Japan on November 15th, 2020, and then internationally, March 2nd, 2021. A few months later, yes, it is the following year, but still, the difference is about 4 months. Okay, so that is a much shorter period of time, and again, that was the most recent game that I had to memory. I have not played it, I've seen gameplay of it, and that is where my mind went when I saw Like a Dragon, believing that this was the new direction the Yakuza franchise was going in. Evidently, I had a very wrong impression of the game, which is fine. I don't think it's a bad game, but it also does not feel like a game for me. This very much reminds me of when I played, you know, Ninja Gaiden, or like earlier Devil May Cry's, before 5. And admittedly, that is kind of, well, at least the Ninja Gaiden comparisons, what Ninja Gaiden became, is an insult to this game. There are certain levels of depth and complexity that I did not engage with in the combat because I was unfamiliar and rather intimidated by it. I believe that if I had more experience with the Yakuza franchise, was more familiar with how their combo system works, how their targeting system works, how the game feels in general, I would have been more comfortable with it. But I also kind of wanted to jump in with the perspective of a new player who's never experienced it, to see how welcoming it was for me, and it was difficult. The other problem I ran into is because this is, again, an almost 10-year-old game that wasn't really revamped or retooled for the modern world, though it does look nice. I have been so spoiled by more advanced combat systems that have had more time to be refined, to be perfected. They looked at, examples like this game and they said, okay, how do we make this feel just that little bit better? How do we make it feel more responsive, look smoother, things like that? And it's just with the advantage of time, with the advantage of this game and its predecessors and everything else coming before it, we have better feeling combat systems that have kind of created a new standard in today's society. That's not a bad thing by any means, but it does mean when we get games like this that are re-releases of older games without complete overhauls to how the systems work, they're going to feel older. They're going to feel clunkier. They're going to feel not quite right. Now, for some people, that's totally fine. They can get past that, no problem. They love sinking hundreds of hours into these Yakuza games, and I think that's great. For me personally, again, having come at this as my first experience, having come at this after a slew of, I don't want to say better or more polished games, because I do believe this is a good game, especially for the time that it released in, but I'm going to say more advanced games, just because I can't find the right word that I'm looking for. It was really hard for me to get in, come to grips with, and kind of get a feeling for and find my footing in this world, in this gameplay. It was not for me, but I think that's okay. I appreciate the fact they're finally releasing some of these games internationally, because I know there's a lot of people who love this series, who love these games, and want to get as much out of them as they can. So for those people, I think it's great. You guys are having a feast with this one. As for new players, it's a little harder for me to recommend unless, again, you were a fan of older Devil May Cry's or, the original Ninja Gaidens, like the number 1, number 2, not number 3. No, don't even talk about that one. That one doesn't exist. But other games are like the early 2014, late 2013, so like kind of around the early PS4 era. There are absolutely good games in there, but they feel very different. I don't want to say they're worse, because they're not, but they're certainly different to what we have today. They have led to the innovations, the things that we see today, the feelings that we have today. And if you, like me, cannot get past that discrepancy, that barrier to entry of adjusting to what we used to be familiar with, adjusting to a both old and new feeling, this game probably won't click for you. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It is just a consequence of the very nature of this game and the nature of how it was created, how it was branded, and everything like that. So all in all, I absolutely think Ishin Like a Dragon, or Like a Dragon Ishin, whichever one it is a great game. I think you can get hundreds of hours out of it. I know many of the other Yakuza games have mountains of side content and mini games, things you can do, and I don't see this game being any different. I think the side quests, the mini games, the distractions will be different. They'll have a different flavor to them, but I don't think that's a bad thing by any means. I think this was a really interesting step for the series back then, and I am curious to see where it goes in the future, especially if it does come out with new releases, like proper new releases that release in Japan, in the early to mid 2020s, and then release internationally a few months later. I think that's great. Those will feel, or at least I would assume they would feel, much more modern. With all that being said, please let me know what your experience with the Yakuza franchise is in the description down below. I would love to hear from especially longtime fans. Like, when did you start playing? Did you go for the original Japanese releases, or did you wait till we had international releases? What year did you jump into this? How do you feel the games stack up to modern day? I want the answer to all these questions and much, much more, especially, again, if you have experience with this franchise, or if you've never played this franchise. What do you think about the gameplay? Do you think you'd want to try it? Does this seem like something that interests you? Please let me know so I know kind of what to look forward to on Game Pass, or kind of what videos you'd like to see in the future. With all that being said, thank you, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between, so much for sticking around, so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. It really helps out the channel. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!